Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Merchant Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I welcome you all to this online session. As you're aware, we have just completed our nation's 75th year of independence, and this milestone entrusts each one of us with the responsibility of reflecting on the way forward. The MCCI Leadership Series is an exercise in envisioning the India of tomorrow with leaders from diverse fields. We need to now envision our journey for the next 25 years and work out a detailed plan and programs for the future. To achieve global leadership position, there is an urgent need for deliberation to figure out the right policies for inclusive as well as sustainable growth which benefits everyone. It is to look into this future that we have begun this MCCI Leadership Series, Ideas for India at 100. We have had stalwarts from various fields like Mr. Amish Tripathi, Grammy Award winner Ricky Cage, Arun Mishra, Sri Rajan Navani, and others on this forum earlier. In today's session, we come back to industry as a focus area, and we are honored to have with us today Sri Kulin Lalbhai, Executive Director, Arvind Limited, and Director of Arvind Fashions. He is responsible for driving new initiatives in the consumer businesses of the group. He has been instrumental in setting up several new retail concepts and also spearheads the group's digital initiatives. He also plays an active role in the overall corporate strategy. Mr. Lalbhai holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School and a BSc in Electrical Engineering from Stanford University. Prior to this current role, he has also been a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. I warmly welcome to your session, Kulin. Given the future centricity of your role, I would first like to share with us your views on your vision of India in 2047. Over to you, Kulin.
Thanks so much, Rishabh-ji, for this opportunity, and it's great to be with all of you today. I'll try and keep my opening comments brief, but honestly, I have a very deep conviction that not only do the next few decades, I think, belong to India. I think, in fact, the next century or so, I think, belongs to China and India and some of Southeast Asia. So I think this is a very unique time to be in our part of the world. I think recently I read in The Economist that in some 15, 20 years from now, almost 50% of the growth in the world economy is going to be literally South Asia and China. So that just shows how much the center of gravity is moving to our part of the world. In a sense, 300 years ago when industrialization started, there was a huge divergence which happened because before that, 50% of global GDP actually came from India, China, and Asia. And then because of the Industrial Revolution, the West kind of just took off because of their innovation and industrialization. But now, that divergence is going to lead to the great convergence, where you will see India and China converge back, both in terms of, the economic strength, the GDP growth, the per capita GDP with the West. And the implication is possibly we will end up creating the biggest middle class humanity has ever seen. And more importantly, hopefully we will pull out and eradicate anything that we call, by today's definition as poverty or extreme poverty. So I think the opportunity, if we frame like that, we are a part of the great reconvergence of the global economies, and we are the people who are going to witness the biggest creation of the middle class in human history. It's just a very humbling thought and idea. And I think now if I just look at India, we have within that context of the emergence of Asia, possibly the best winning cards, I would say, right? I think the first winning card we have is that historically India has struggled to make its manufacturing scale. It's just at 15, 16% of our GDP. But the world over, what COVID has done to jolt everyone to say that, you cannot have such an over dependence on China. For the first time, we are seeing, and even in our own industry, textiles, we're seeing a huge interest in moving supply chains out of China. Everyone calls it China plus one. But, India is the plus one for most people because you need a very large economy to take away any share from China. So of course, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, they will also be taking the market share away. But I think India will be one of the big beneficiaries, and the government is serious. They're building world-class infrastructure, changing logistics, the PLI scheme where they are rewarding people to put scaled manufacturing assets. All of this will lead to a very different future, I feel, of Indian manufacturing compared to what we've seen in the past. I think the second trump card that I would like to call out is what I put under new age businesses. And I think the two big themes that are playing out in India on new age businesses are the whole startup scene, which is a whole digital transformation happening of our economy, whether it is digital payments, whether it is digital consumer tech, whether it is, any of those, data centers. There's just so much being built out, and the entrepreneurial energy on the software side is just phenomenal on startups. That means our productivity will enhance massively. And the other theme is new energy. I think India is an energy consumer. That's why we have this huge trade deficit in the age of fossil fuel. But the fuel of tomorrow is the sun. And very few people realize, but India has the most amount of that compared to any country in the world. So if you suddenly, from being an energy deficient country, become the most energy rich country in the world, people are not realizing what that means. And solar is also the raw material into the fuel of the future, which is hydrogen, which is how green hydrogen is created again from solar energy. So if you see what some of the Indian companies are doing, building out an end-to-end solar supply chain and industry and an end-to-end hydrogen industry, you might see India catapult as an economy because you've completely recast your cost of energy. I think the third very strong theme is services. I think India has always funded its goods deficit, export deficit with the export of services. And the scale India has now reached on services, more than $100 billion of services. I think that engine is now unstoppable. There is no place in the world. I was in Paris recently, and the CEO told us that he's hired 250,000 engineers for his company in India. And he's like, there's no place in the world I could have built that sort of scale. So, the juggernaut of Indian service exports cannot stop. It is unstoppable. And if you, in a sense, then look at it with the new manufacturing wave that is to come and the services exports which are to come, I think we might, similar to China, become a current account surplus country. And that means you have more money than you broadly need. And that changes the game, because then you can invest in all kinds of things: social security, infrastructure, global asset buyout. So I think it's a very, very interesting phase. Maybe in our lifetime, we may see India move from a current account deficit to a current account surplus. And the last thing I would kind of point out is governance. I think one of the biggest problems in today's world is democracies become fragile because of just the divisiveness that has come in all global democracies. Decision making gets compromised. Taking long-term views gets compromised. Countries start getting very vulnerable in decision making. I think India politically, I'm not trying to make a comment on any worldview of any political party, but I do want to point out that the political stability and strength of our country changes the game, the way we can project our power abroad. I was with the External Affairs Minister a few months back, and he was telling us that with the strength of the Indian economy, the currency of diplomacy that he can spend has completely changed. It means he has power whenever he enters a room with any global leader, just because of what the future Indian economy means to the world. So I think a strong government with a strong reform agenda and a social security agenda is a good thing for our country. I think a few decades of stability will go a very long way in ensuring that all these resets that are happening, whether it is the infrastructure reset, whether it is the demographic support at the lower end of the society, which is being attempted, the opening up of various sectors which are being attempted, the uh, reforms in the capital markets, which makes the cost of capital low for our economy. All these massive resets are underway. And when you have continuity of government, it makes a huge difference. It's, someone was joking that I think India is the only country where we can predict the outcome of the next election. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but from a economy perspective, I think it's a good thing. And I think these are the trump cards. And I think if these trump cards are played well, I think India will remain the fastest growing large economy of the world for a 20-year run. And that's kind of the things that it's very exciting for people like us, all Indians, in fact, to be a part of that opportunity. So with that, let me end my opening remarks and would love to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kulin. I think that was a very, very optimistic and a very, very positive picture of the future, whether it's 2047, and the journey, of course, seems very, very exciting. But I think there is much to do if we have to achieve that vision or achieve that goal or achieve that dream. And my question to you would be, when you talk about these things, what do you feel would be some of the biggest challenges that we will face as a country, as a nation, as Indians to reach that? And how do we address those challenges? What would be your views on that?
That's a great question. I mean, it's the job of every entrepreneur to be optimistic, because I think if as an entrepreneur you're not optimistic, the economy stops, right? So I agree that, whatever I said was a very optimistic worldview. But that being said, I think there are clear challenges. I think one of the challenges we really need to look out for as we embark on this transformation is that can we give this opportunity to enough Indians? And one of the things that worries in a country like India is when you have 1 billion people and so many people who are deprived of the common inputs to make a fruitful life, you can end up creating a very bipolar society of educated people with all the opportunities in the world and the uneducated people who are just living on government handouts. And I think the amount of effort that needs to go into skilling our population and, more importantly, educating our population, the amount India spends on education is very small as a percentage of its GDP. And within that, our efficacy in educating our youth is even poorer. So I think it's very easy for a democratic dividend to become a demographic disaster if you cannot provide your youth with the skills required to make most of the opportunities. So the opportunity is there's no doubt about it. It's on a platter. But unless we really take on the challenge of providing our young minds with the right education, we are not giving them the chance to take advantage of this opportunity. I think the other thing, India is such a diverse country. And I think unity in diversity has been the basic fabric of our society. I think for any country to progress and develop, you have to ensure harmony. So I think, again, I would point out that with so many differences, so many religions, so many regional, subcultures, I think the one thing that should never tear is India's, democratic and close-knit fabric. I think anything that could lead to disharmony on the social side of things could also be very dangerous. And the third is that, vulnerability-wise, the transition from the fossil fuel era to the non-fossil fuel era is not going to be simple. There will be these super cycles of crazy priced energy. We are completely dependent on the world when it comes to our energy needs. So I think that I would point out always as a macro, risk for us, which we have to manage, because there could be tough times to come. And the fourth, I would say, is the world has become very volatile. It's a clash of civilizations happening between the West and Asia. And geopolitically, anything can happen with the emergence of China as a new superpower. So I think that will remain a defense challenge. We are in the neighborhood of the future superpower of the world, and with the ability to emerge as a superpower. So I think those risks will always remain geopolitically.
Well, you spoke about fuel, but they say data is going to be the world's new fuel. The reason why I'm asking this question is also because I know you are involved in some the tech side of industry and business. How do you see the role of data analytics, growth of Web 3.0 impacting businesses today as well as the future? Not only the existing businesses, but even future industries.
Another great question. See, I think the digital theme playing out is actually playing out to India's strengths. Because one thing we do well is to generate enough people who understand technology. I think that's one of the things India relatively does well. Even though we have so many holes in our education system, we create enough good engineers and hungry entrepreneurs. So I think we are just seeing the beginning of what is possible in India on the digital side. And I think India will go the China way on digital, much more than the American way. And the China way is, where data and new age tech is built into the foundational layer of the country. So, for example, the West does not have anything that is the equivalent of UPI. And it's one of the most powerful technology backbones the world has ever seen. Because today, you can buy a pan, with your phone. It's that simple. It's like 4 digits on the phone, and, a small vendor or a hawker on the road can also sell goods to you. This is just one example of how these digital backbones are being created in our country. And the power of these backbones is that they end up connecting everything and becoming data creation nodes. And I see this in every industry, the whole digital consumer revolution happening. There was a time in our apparel stores, we used to, analyze trends such as how many shirts sell across the country or how many t-shirts sell, which designs sell. Now on my application, when you are buying off my website, I know what Rishabh Kothari buys, right? So the level of data microness that you get in the new digital consumer economy did not exist in the analog economy of before. And, all these things are being built out so fast. The West, e-commerce still accounts for high single digit of Western economies. In India, it's already in the mid-teens, and in China, it is 30%. So, our economies, because we don't have those legacy assets and processes and ways of doing things, we can leapfrog. So the future will be, with these backbones creating data, and then companies using that data smartly to make better decisions. And that's where you bring in intelligence. You bring in what is called cognitive science, which is predictive analytics and blockchain and all of these new age, very powerful use cases. I think startups do it as a part of their DNA. That's what makes them different, and that's what makes them nimble and smart. But I think what will also happen is a lot of these things will and should seep into the old world or the mainline industries and companies. So, for example, even in our industry, which is our manufacturing industry, textiles, we are using IoT and Internet of Things devices in our processing machines. And those machines are relaying data real time into this data lake. And then there are analytics helping us predict when the machine would break down. When do you do preventive maintenance so that you can get that 2% extra throughput in your factory? So, I think using data and doing fancy predictive analytics is not something that needs to be limited to a Paytm and a Flipkart. I think it is applicable to every industry today in India, and it's up to India's businessmen and entrepreneurs to fully embrace it and take advantage of what this new world has to offer.
Great. So this is interesting. And of course, you also touch your own core industry, which is textiles. So let's shift gears and talk about textiles. I mean, what do you think are the key steps India needs to take to be a global leader in textiles and apparel, especially given our position in the value chain and the competition that we face from China and other low-cost emerging economies?
So let me start with what's the opportunity. One, India has a thriving domestic market. We are one of the only countries in the world which will have such a large, fast-growing market. The Indian domestic market is already almost $100 billion and growing at 8%. So that's a huge opportunity for Indian textile companies to actually serve the Indian market. Now, if you look at the world market, global trade is $1 trillion. Out of that, China controls 30 to 35%. It's the largest. India is the second, and it's at 5% of the global market. So that kind of tells you the difference between the number one and number two. And China will have to exit textiles. It's just not affordable to continue textiles 20, 30 years down the line in China, because China will be a middle income economy with a very high per capita GDP. So I think, how does India take away 5 to 10% from China? And that would mean tripling our exports and building, between 25 years out. I think the government had asked us to quantify what is the opportunity of textiles. And I think it's somewhere around a $500, $600 billion opportunity between exports and the Indian market, if we get everything right. Now, there's a whole lot of things we have to get right. One, India has historically always been good at producing fabrics, but never very efficient at producing garments. So the first thing India needs to fix is, how do we scale up our apparel manufacturing? How do we create these mega factories which employ 10,000 people to stitch garments together? And I think there's a whole set of things required for that. We need free trade agreements with Western economies, because Bangladesh and Vietnam, our two competitors, have those. We do not. We need to incentivize apparel as an industry. That's where the PLI scheme can make a very big difference. We need to do plug and play infrastructure so that entrepreneurs can come in with their machines and just start, stitching clothes. So that the Mitra scheme, the big, textile parks which are going to come up in India, that would address that challenge. So I think a lot of government framework and ground work happening to make that happen. So that's one theme. The second theme is India needs to diversify its products. We are largely a cotton-focused manufacturing country, and the future of the industry is man-made fibers. The world already exports, on the export side, 60% of global trade is MMA. And India has almost no share in MMA. So we need to really build a very strong foundation on the man-made fiber side. Again, a lot of efforts being made by the government to do that. But I would point out that is something else that we need to do to really scale up in this industry. The third opportunity is technical textiles. That's what advanced materials, new age materials within textiles used for industrial uses, protective uses, geo textiles, and it's a whole new world. I think that's a nascent business. Historically has been in the West, in Europe, I think that's also going to move to Asia or is moving to Asia. And I think India should be its rightful home. So I think technical textiles is another very exciting and interesting opportunity for India. I think the last theme I would touch upon as a mega theme is sustainability. I think every brand in the world is now focused on how one creates a sustainable, supply chain. And textiles has historically been one of the most resource intensive and polluting industries. And I think India has an opportunity to brand itself and deliver a green supply chain where sustainability is at the core. And again, because of the gift the planet has given us on solar energy and various other things, actually being sustainable would also make good business sense in our country. So I think that would be the big trends, the movement from China, the need for us to step up and become a large global player, and to continue to keep growing our domestic market along these 3-4 themes that I talked about.
Great. So, I mean, of course, you spoke about sustainability, but what about affordability? I mean, when we talk about the huge disparity in incomes that we have in India, do you think that there is a solution to provide clothing that is affordable and yet sustainable for all Indians? Is a homegrown Atmanirbhar textile solution for all? Is there a way of making that a reality? What do you feel?
No, you're right. I think the challenge, especially for the domestic market, is affordability. Whilst one can make exports green much faster than domestic, we do have to solve things for domestic. And I think, the cost of, if you look at really load, the cost of being sustainable at a garment level, the cost is not Herculean. The problem is that, today there aren't incentives to spend that extra 7 to 10 rupees a meter to do the right thing. And that's where the wrong behavior starts. That's where people don't treat the water. That's where you use the wrong substances. So I personally believe that those shortcuts should be shut by the government. And I think that's the role of policy, that we shouldn't allow anyone to damage the environment, because we are damaging, what we are going to leave behind for our children. I think that is finally what one needs to look at. And if it makes a shirt 10 to 15 rupees more expensive, so be it. There are other ways one can, finally, clothing is a disposable, income sort of purchase. It is not as basic as the need of food or water or other things. So if it is a disposable, income item, if it's a marginal increase in its cost, the market will finally absorb it. The issue is that when too many people do the wrong things, then it's very difficult for some people to do the right things. And I think that has to stop. That's step number one. Like, for example, we used to use coal ad hoc in our country. Cheaper, yes, but the government is going to make it impossible for you to use coal in the future. And that's the way the whole world is going, with carbon tax and all of these things. And that's a reality. Now, it might make many products 10% more expensive, but you live in that world with 10% more expensive products, but a planet which, 5 generations down, people can really live in. So I think that's kind of the frame of reference. And for the most poor people, there are always other ways to subsidize their lives, right? It's not about polluting things to provide cheap things to the poorest people. We should someday have universal basic income to give everyone a certain amount of money every month, so that they can do the kapda roti makan and have the dignity of life. So you don't do that by doing the wrong things, creating pollution so that you can create something cheaper to sell to the poorest. I don't think that logic works.
Great. So, okay, a different area. I mean, today when we talk about garments, there are global brands which are able to create a market for themselves globally, like Uniqlo or Zara. What would it take for an Indian brand, or I mean, do you see Arvind becoming a global brand, or what would you do you think it will take for an Indian brand to spread its wings globally and become a truly global representative of the Indian industrial prowess?
If you ask my honest opinion, I'm not seeing an Indian brand become a global aspirational brand in the near future. Because, a global brand, you are selling a global aspiration. And today, even everywhere in the world, the aspiration is still the West. Even if you look at China, it has some of the biggest brands in the world, but they are not truly global, other than possibly Li Ning, which is a sports brand out of China. Most of the real brands have come out of the developed economies because there is a certain cultural soft power of someone who has reached a certain level of affluence. And that's what the brand name suggests. I think there is another theme which Indian brands can really live on and gain scale on, which is the Indian pride theme. And I think if you look at China, there are $5-10 billion brands which have all become successful because of the strength of the Chinese market and how they serve the Chinese customer best. So I think that is a theme clearly playing out in India, where brands which are by Indians, for Indians, and proud to be Indian will really become relevant and strong. It's less about trying to make an American buy them. It's about, we are going to be the third largest economy in the world. So I am, as an entrepreneur, I'm more interested in selling to Indians than Americans.
Great. So, but what about Atmanirbhar? Do you see Indian brands proliferating in India? I mean, if you just, I mean, okay, Indian brands may not become aspiration in the world, but today India imports a very large volume of imported brands. The whole idea of Atmanirbharta was not only self-sufficiency, but also import substitution. Do you see Indian brands becoming aspirational in India?
See, I think this is a little misunderstood. Or if I look at the Indian market today, that $100 billion market I talked about, apparel imports will not even be 1 to 2%. So Indian textile market is completely Indian. Now, even the global brands that you talk about, the ownership may be global, but most of them make in India. Like take, for instance, Arvind. We have only one Indian brand of our own out of our 5 large brands, but the remaining 4, we make 98% of what we sell in India. So they are as Indian as an Indian brand. They're using Indian fabrics. They're being designed by Indians sitting out of Bangalore. They are being sold to Indians on Myntra and in a store in Bangalore. So they are Indian. Now the logo may be that of an American company. We may be paying some royalty to the American, but it's Indian. So I think Atmanirbharta is not about import substitution. I think that's an important nuance to understand. I think Atmanirbharta is about making in India for Indians and the world.
Fair point. But how about, I mean, do you see the cultural change in terms of the kind of apparel, the changing in fashion? I mean, for example, I was just talking to a very large garment manufacturer, and they're into what you can call celebration wear. And he was telling me how there's certain categories of clothing, like, for example, high-end sarees, where they are now restricted only to celebration wear, things like that. Do you see changing trends affecting our textile business or the clothing business?
I think there will always be a change in style and fashion. So, for example, the world used to be more formal. Now it is more casual. The world used to be more shirt and woven intensive. Today it is more t-shirt and knits intensive. We used to be largely aping the West in the past. Now we're very proud to say we are Indian, look Indian, be Indian. If you go to a marriage now, you will see more bundis than suits. So I mean that's the nature of it. So I don't think it's something one should worry about. These changes happen over time, and the supply chain adjusts. Brands adjust. Today, we have an American brand called Arrow. We are selling bangalas and bandis even in Arrow because that's where the market is. So everyone adjusts to how the markets adjust, and I don't think there's any big theme that the Indian industry needs to be very worried about.
Great. So, Kulin, we're almost 40 minutes, but a personal question: as a business leader, what keeps you going? What is your personal motivation mantra?
So, my brother and I, we are the fifth generation in a 100-year-old kind of business, a business which has reinvented itself every 20, 30 years. Otherwise, we wouldn't be around. And I think the model that we've grown up with is a model of trusteeship, that you are a part of something bigger than yourself. You have a role and a responsibility to make that platform meaningful, not only for oneself, but for the stakeholders involved. And I think the broad mental model of that, stakeholder set is wider than just the shareholders. So how do you make a difference to your employees' life and make it a place to work where people can realize themselves? How do you make the organization play a role in the betterment of the country and the society? Because I think in countries like us, which are still developing, relatively poor, I think business has a bigger responsibility than just making profit. Business is a way to help the country progress. So if you change your frame of reference to one which is a little more purposeful, I feel that is the critical ingredient to keep going. I think making money cannot be something that can keep you going beyond the point, because when you have enough for your needs, money becomes, I feel, meaningless. It is more important to ensure that beyond creating shareholder wealth, you are creating stakeholder value. And personally, I feel that the responsibility to make most of what has been given as a wonderful foundation by many generations of leaders, I think that's what my brother Puneet and I constantly strive to be worthy of and build on. I think you are on mute.
Yeah, my apologies. So that was a wonderful thought you shared. And what would your advice be to other future leaders?
It's a very broad, difficult, open-ended question. But I think a couple of things that I would point out based on my own life. It's a very young innings so far, so I don't think I have much wisdom to share, but just some learnings which I've picked up along the way. I think one of the most critical pieces, I think, which is one of the biggest strengths one can have as an entrepreneur or a businessman, is humility. I think humility is the foundation of being not only a successful human being, that's a different topic, but a successful businessman. Because humble people listen, humble people do not have crazy biases, humble people learn quickly, so they don't make the same mistakes again and again. So I think being humble, I would say, is one of the very important ingredients of success. I would say another very critical ingredient for success is to be hungry. I think hungry for learning is what I meant, which is you have to constantly want to improve yourself. The more hunger you have on self-growth and self-improvement, the more you will expand your capabilities, your worldview, your effectiveness as a human being. So again, I feel that constant urge to learn, I think can be one of the strongest enablers for a successful career. And third thing as a theme I would like to point out, and I think it's very relevant to India, is to not be afraid to fail. In life, if you have never failed, I personally feel you have never tried hard enough. I think the fun comes when you are in that zone where you are challenging yourself, right? Below that zone is the zone of boredom. If you push yourself beyond that Goldilocks phase, then it's a zone of anxiety and worry. But you just need to push yourself into that zone of slightly being uncomfortable, slightly putting yourself out there, because that's the zone where you grow. So I think India stigmatizes failure too much, both as a society and as a mental construct. And I think that holds India back. It prevents us from thinking boldly enough and trying things that will make enough of a difference in the world. So I think I would point out these. I mean, there are many ways one can answer your question, but I thought of these three off the top of my head.
Great. Thanks, Kulin. That has been an excellent interaction. And I've had the privilege of knowing you in person. So when you speak about humility, I can vouch for that, not only for you, but your entire family. Given the fact that you come from a very, very illustrious background, it has always been a pleasure to know you all so well. So thank you for joining us. There's some questions on the chat. If you have some time, we could take them.
Sure, I can take a couple of questions.
So the first question is, when do we get to see more Tirupurs coming across in India? This is by Suruji.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think clusters are tough to pull off because you need a certain critical mass. And I think we already have clusters like Tirupur. There are 4 or 5 other large clusters. What the government is trying to do with the Mitra scheme is actually the concept of incubating new clusters. So they're going to create 1,000-acre industrial townships which are plug and play and make it so easy for SMEs and large companies to come together in one location that it should hopefully spark off a new cluster. Because clusters are very powerful. You have enough people packed in a small square kilometer area. The synergies can be very powerful. So we have Ichal Karanji, we've got, Surat cluster here in Gujarat. We've got a winter wear cluster in Ludhiana. So Tirupur is not the only cluster, but I agree with you. We need many more Tirupurs, Ludhianas and Surats, and hopefully some of these schemes that the government is doing will help make that happen.
Another question is, any thoughts on loss of privacy in this new digital era? We've been talking about all the great things that this data does to us, but what about privacy?
So I would like to think that in a country like India, there will be enough guardrails on the right of privacy. We are not a China where the government peeps into things it should not. That being said, I think if we want to get the benefits of a personalized world with personalized service and optimization, we will also have to become a little less rigid about some data being shared. So let me give you an example. Google, if it can abstract out some of your behaviors of browsing history, have you really lost too much on the privacy side? And as long as it's an opt-in, it should be something like, I'm personally very, very comfortable if Google takes some of my movement data and helps suggest which coffee shop I can go to. I actually consider it a positive. Now, this is my personal choice. As long as I can opt in so that I get the benefit of that suggestion, and someone who's deeply uncomfortable with the idea of having some sort of tracking like this in their lives can opt out. I think that's a fair world. And I think a lot of data is abstracted data. So, for example, in my company, we use a predictive algorithm to take a lot of sales data and predict which design is going to sell next year. Now, I'm not breached any privacy because it's abstracted data. It's not about knowing what Rishabh Kothari does. But if 1,000 people have behaved like Rishabh Kothari, then I do know that there is something I can do to serve those people better. So I think a lot of the data use cases in this world I was talking about do not require the data of one. It's an aggregation done to create cohorts. And those cohorts are where the meaning comes. So companies don't gain by knowing personal details of a Rishabh Kothari or a Jashodhara. It comes from, taking these individual data sets, but abstracting them out and getting trends out of them. So, I mean, it is a gray line somewhere, but I have faith in our democracy that we should get that balance right.
Well, I guess there is always different ways of looking at the same thing. As you said, there is a different level of comfort that each one of us derives in terms of privacy. So I think eventually some kind of balance will emerge between how companies are using data and how people perceive their data is being used. So thank you, Kulin. That was really wonderful. Thank you very, very much for sparing your time to join us this afternoon. I think this is very, very interesting, and we are really grateful to you for this exclusive interaction. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to many more such occasions, hopefully in person in future. Thanks a lot.
Yes, and thanks so much for having me. It was great being here and being able to answer some of these questions. So looking forward to meeting up sometime.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kulin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for joining us at this edition of Ideas for Tomorrow. So looking forward to our next edition very soon. Thank you very much.